Welcome to the Standard Deviations podcast, presented by Orion Advisor Solutions and hosted by Dr. Daniel Crosby, Orion's Chief Behavioral Officer and New York Times best-selling author. Each week, Dr. Crosby interviews a fascinating new guest on a range of compelling topics, from literature to psychology to financial wellness. To learn more about Dr. Crosby's behavioral finance work at Orion, visit www.orion.com.
Hello and welcome to Standard Deviations. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Crosby. I am joined today by Carl Richards, an early thought leader in the practical application of behavioral finance, and personally someone whose writing has impacted me and my own thinking. He wrote for the New York Times for 10 years, famously using sketches to illustrate complicated financial concepts. Now he writes just for us at behaviorgap.com. He also has the coolest logo in all of financial services. So welcome to the show, Carl.
Daniel, thank you very much. What a pleasure. It's super fun to talk to you.
Yeah. Welcome to you and your cool logo. So speaking of your cool logo, you have positioned one of your most recent endeavors, the Society of Advice, as serving real financial advisors. This, of course, presupposes the existence of fake financial advisors. So what's the difference? What's the difference between a real financial advisor and a fake financial advisor in your mind?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's establish that there are definitely fake financial advisors, right? Like we all know. But in terms of what, it's such a good question. So I have two answers. One, it's a lot like the Supreme Court's definition, the Supreme Court's definition of pornography, right? When they were asked,
you know it when you see it.
I don't know, but you know it when you see it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one way I think about the difference between real and fake financial advisors is you know it when you experience it. Actually, I want to say three things. The second one is my original, when this first came out, I was on a panel at FPA retreat, I believe, with Michael Kitces and Tim Maurer. And I said something like I was really frustrated at the time because I can't remember when this was, 2008, 9, 10, 11, somewhere in there. And if you remember that time, there was all these stories. It was sort of Madoff and mini Madoff. There were all these stories about financial advisors doing, flat out criminal things. And I was at the time writing and speaking relatively publicly, and I kept running into people, and I would be like, I know, and I always felt like I had to talk quietly, like it was a secret. I was always like, no, I know financial planners who do crazy good work, because at the same time there was all that stuff going on, the global financial crisis, and I was watching and hearing stories from people who were like my colleagues, who I thought, they're saving people's lives.
Yeah.
And the disconnect between what we were seeing in the public and what I was seeing among peers was just so jarring. And I remember talking to a couple of journalist friends. I was like, no. And I felt like I had to be quiet. There's a secret society of real financial planners. And they would look at me like, oh, that's cute, Carl. Like the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, right? Like it was a fairy tale. And so that's kind of how this thing started. And the third thing I'll tell you, and they would ask me, well, how do I find one? Or how do you qualify? So I started saying that at this panel. I told that story. I was like, there's a secret society of real, and this was at FPA retreat, right? Which is like the home of deep financial planning. And this started a whole buzz in the con. We had to talk about it. We had one of those under the tree sessions about it. And I remember being struck at the under the tree session at this big table, and there were luminaries there, people I'd looked up to, the fathers and mothers of this industry, of this profession. And they were saying, what is real? And I was struck by the idea that there was a group of professional planners sitting around saying, what does it mean?
Yeah.
So I thought, if we don't know, right, how are other people? So I then established the Sharon test, which is, the test for the secret society, since I named it, is I get to decide who gets to be in. And the way I decide is, would I send my mother to you? That's the Sharon test. So I like that one. And then the last thing I'll say about this is Ron Lieber, my editor, and I, at the time, we every couple of years, we tried to write an article about how to find a financial planner.
Yeah.
And every we only were able to do it once. The one time Ron did it, he used his criteria to hire his own planner. And you can find that column, and then find the column about 18 months later when he got the letter from whoever, the regulator, saying that planner was stealing money from little old ladies, right? So which is just, so every time I wrote a column that had like a checklist, and I'm for those of you just listening, right? Like if the video comes out of this, I'm using like a funnel image, right? With my hands. Every time we wrote a checklist, out of the bottom would fall somebody who ended up on the front page of a newspaper. So we could never get like a checklist that felt fail-proof. So we're back to the Supreme Court definition, right? Like, you know it when you see it. And to me, the difference is a real financial planner has the technical chops, right? And I'm sometimes accused of downplaying that, and I never have meant to. The technical chops, like as a rock star with the spreadsheets and the calculators.
Yeah.
And understands that money equals feelings, and that a balance sheet is emotional, and that goals are guesses. Understands that they're not a defender of an outdated map. They're a guide in a changing landscape. They understand that they're not selling certainty because it's impossible to sell, right? So that being able to hold those two competing truths in their head at the same time, which is the spreadsheets and the calculators matter, and they don't matter at all. At the same time, we've got to hold that tension and not run from that tension. Because when we run from that tension, what we do is we try to sell certainty. And then we get this pervasive false sense of precision that's pervasive in our industry. And that's where all the problems come from. So you got to be able to hold this tension. Rock star at the spreadsheets, and somebody's going to cry on your couch, right?
So first of all, let me say that I don't disagree with anything you've said, right? Like I'm completely on board with everything you've said, but I'm thinking right now, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow and my wife is sitting here looking for a financial advisor, right? Like on the one hand, I'm with you. The checklist thing is insufficient. Like people are still going to slip through that crack, but it seems like better than nothing. And then the other piece, the experiential piece, the sort of it when you see it thing. Like, first of all, charlatans can be enormously charming, right? And then we also know that maybe by the time you figure out that you're dealing with a charlatan, it's too late. So for someone who has no expertise, what sort of practical advice do you give them for selecting a financial advisor if it's not a checklist?
Yeah, no, that's all true. It's such a challenge. And you're absolutely right. Like charlatans know that too, right? Like so I think there are certainly things that get you closer.
Yeah.
Right. And you may as well use them. And a thing like an industry standard designation, sort of minimum requirement designation, like the CFP.
Right.
Is it foolproof? No. But is it better than nothing? Yes. Something like where they work. Now, this one really drives me crazy because some of the people I'd send my mom to work at places where they are not allowed to call themselves fiduciaries. Right? They're some of the best planners in the world. They happen to work at a big brokerage firm and they're just swimming against that current. Well, are they the exception to the rule? I don't know. So one of the things you could point at is like, do they work in an environment where they are more likely to have less conflicts than not? Right? Can they call themselves a fiduciary? Is that a good screen? Sure. And then I think what I think works better, and this is really challenging when you bring up the charlatan fake, financial advisor person, is, you go spend the time and you ask them specific questions. And my favorite question, both for what the answer is and maybe equally as important is how it's answered, is it's actually two questions. How do we pay for your services?
Yes.
Is one question. And the second, and it's important that they are two separate questions. The second is, how are you compensated for your advice? And ideally, those answers would be the thing would be the same. Ideally, if they're different, it doesn't disqualify someone. It just means you need to know about it and be thoughtful about what that means to you. And we all know some of the ways that could be different. Like I'm compensated by, I go on a trip, or I get bonuses, or I do other things. But I think equally as important as the answer
Yeah.
is how that question is met.
Mm.
And I think real financial planners, and you're right, charlatans know this too, but real financial planners hopefully will beat you to that conversation. Yeah. And if they don't, when they're asked, it's greeted with, sort of the sense of like, I'm glad you asked. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that. And to understand there is no conflict-free relationship, no matter how you structure, no matter if you're hourly, retainer, AUM, there isn't a conflict-free structure when we're exchanging money. So a real planner acknowledges conflicts, does their best to manage them, and talks about them with a client, right? But you can't be conflict-free.
Yeah, I like that. Almost more important than the substance of the answer to how do you get paid is how non-defensively that's met. Because to me, that's like a pretty sure sign of, you're dealing with someone reputable versus not. So you talked about false precision here a minute ago. You talked about goals. One conversation you've been having with Michael Kitces with some regularity that I've been following with interest is around goals. So you recently shared that one of the first steps in real financial planning was creating a statement of financial purpose, which sounds a bit like a goal, but you've also been outspoken in your podcast with Kitces that so much of how we think about goals in financial planning and what we call goals-based planning is wrong and perhaps overly precise. So how do we help clients articulate powerful goals that are salient, that are motivating, without falling prey to this trap of sort of excessive or false precision?
Yeah. So first, let me just say, I know that I am often wrong and never in doubt. So I don't have any problem with that idea, but I just have I have an opinion that I'm trying to forcibly insert into the industry. And that is, it's around this idea. I think it can be best summed up by this concept of like real financial planning is not about defending a map. Like we draw a map when we have, okay, where are you today? Where do you want to go? Let's call those goals. We draw a map. We say you're 97.237% confident. We're going to help you meet that map. And that line represents a 30-year, in some cases, 30, 40, 50-year, model of what the client's life's going to look like. And the only thing we know for sure about that line is that it's wrong, right? That's the only thing we know for sure. We just don't know how. And I think we run from that tension because we want desperately, we're in a service industry. Most of us got in this industry because we're trying to help people, and people don't like uncertainty. And so we want to deliver, on like a platter, here's certainty for you. And it's not reality. And so one place where that hits the ground is goals. And goals specifically are problematic because I think if all of your listeners just take a step, like pause for a minute and think of somebody asking you, how do you feel like when somebody says, what are your goals? Right. And there's this tension that develops right at the base of my neck. And it feels like somebody just placed a giant, like, is that Sisyphus that, or Atlas, like a giant thing on my shoulders. That's a different, and first of all, I think we don't know. I think Rene Girard's work on mimetic desire, helps us understand, and Shlomo, Shlomo's, how do you say his last name?
Bernard.
Yeah. He's done a lot of work on this. We don't know what our goals is. One of his suggestions of having a list, almost like a menu of goals, is pointing in that direction, right? We don't typically know. And if you haven't read the mimetic desire work, I think it's really, really cool. We learn what our goals should be. We learn how to desire by watching what other people desire from the earliest age. And it's only gotten worse with Insta life. So I think that doesn't mean they're not important. It just means they're guesses. And the easiest way to get there in my mind, is to teach people, to lead them on a path to it. So instead of on the intake form in the lobby saying, what are your goals? We have this conversation around purpose. And I love Bill Bacharach's work around values, Simon Sinek's work around start with why, even George Kinder's work, which is amazing, right? That sense that sits under goals. It's why are you going that direction instead of what? And then from there, in that conversation, somebody might say, like, if it were me, I would say time with my family, mainly outside, and serving in my church and community. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And somebody could say to me, a real planner could say to me, oh, hey, you mentioned service in your community. What if we put some framework around that? What would need to happen in order for that? I would need X dollars and it would be this much time. And what if we put some framework around that and we called it a goal?
Mm-hmm.
Would that be okay? Like that to me feels like a different conversation than the intake form. What's my goals? I would have never gotten there.
Yeah.
So that's why. And then remember that goals are indeed guesses. We don't know. And so it's okay to have a strong opinion, move forward, look for disconfirming evidence, and hold that opinion lightly so we can adjust. It's those course corrections. It's the narrowing in of the potential range of outcomes that I think we find are massive value. And I think we forget that because we think we're supposed to defend the map. No, you said your goals were this, right? So hopefully that's helpful in terms of answering your question. And by the way, you're far more in a far better position to answer that question than I am. Like, what do you think about goals?
Yeah, so I'm actually on board with you here, because one of the things that I love about, I think, whatever we want to call it, goals-based planning done well, is that if we can increase the salience of a goal, which, I think a salient goal could just be called a purpose, right? The visceral reaction someone has to this thing that's out there, it drives a lot of good behavior. So I think we talk about goals in an overly precise, sort of sterile, neutered way a lot of times. And so maybe we need to start with this vision, the values, the thing that means the world to them, which doesn't give them a cramp at the base of their neck, but is something that they can talk about expansively and something that they love, and then work backwards from that. That's what I'm hearing you say is like, okay, Carl wants to spend time outside. He wants to spend time at church and with his family. What's the financial reality, generally speaking, that would allow more of that to happen? And I do think it's a similar but fundamentally better way to have that conversation. That's honestly not too far removed. Not too far removed from, I think, what most planners are doing already. You're putting that vision first, and I think it's a small tweak but a really important tweak.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's why. I mean, I'm intentionally strong on this opinion.
Yeah.
Because I want to forcibly insert it and putting a name to it, like a statement of financial purpose, right? That's not much different than what Bill Bacharach said around values-based goals, right? And goals-based planning. Like, I'm not saying any goals-based planning. Come on, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I think the problem just simply is, as we've outlined, like, people don't know. And the process of working with you, I think goal clarification is a massive valuable thing that we do that we don't realize we're even doing. And if we can get better at it, and getting better at it to me is just purely curiosity, right? Just a good first meeting is 100% curiosity. Well, that was fascinating, Daniel. Tell me more about that. Like, what does that mean to you? That could mean different things to different people. Go deeper, say more, right? Like, just this encouraging of like looking, we call it internally, we call it looking for the crunchy bits. Right, where there's like emotional resonance, and just being curious about it, and then helping put definition around it. So yeah, I love that. Yeah, we're certainly on the same page, and I think we need to be discussing more of what does it mean to behave that way. Because if you're a defender of a map, like somebody listed goals, you drew a 30-year line, you behave in a certain way, and when the terrain doesn't turn out to be the map, you can feel guilty. You can feel like you didn't do your job right. You can certainly get defensive. Like if somebody's like, what happened? You can be like, well, the data, and you show them the 10 best days in the market chart. Like you spray them with facts and figures. That's a different interaction than, yeah, there's a storm that came in.
Yeah.
And when I watch the news, I get a little nervous too. But I've got you because I'm an expert at helping you make really important decisions in the face of irreducible uncertainty. I'm an expert at that. The tools I have in my backpack actually had nothing to do with the map, even though I'm the best map drawer in the world, right? But the tools I had in the backpack really have to do with making decisions with incomplete information, and then you reach across the table, you grab them by the collar and say, come on, you're going this way. Based on everything I know about you, I got you, right? So that's a different behavior set. Same tools, maybe even the same words, right? But different behavior.
So one of the things I think you're exactly right that this is a different behavior set, and one of the things that I think is required of real financial advisors is to know themselves, right? So you recently tweeted, "You don't see the world as it really is. You see the world as you really are." And one of the things that Jason Zweig has written about that I absolutely love is that behavioral finance should be more of a mirror onto our own behavior and less of a window through which we see others' behavior. I think when people read your book, people read my book, right? They go, "Oh, my neighbor's like that. My wife's like that. My kid is like that." When really what we should be doing is turning that bright light of introspection back on ourselves. And I think that is that je ne sais quoi, right? Let's have the Alabama guy speak some French, but that's that sort of intangible. That's that sort of intangible piece. An advisor who is truly introspective and aware of their own behavior, I think that flows through. So how do we do that, Carl? How do we begin to see ourselves as we truly are?
Yeah, I think, look, this is a hugely important topic. And speaking specifically to like advisors and industry professionals, like there is a sense of smugness that started developing when behavioral finance started getting popular, right? And you started getting all these speaking requests, and people were like, "Oh, behavioral finance, can you teach it?" There's this sense of smugness that the goal was to teach the clients how dumb they were, right? Like we would all sit up there and go, "Oh, look at silly people making silly mistakes." And then we don't realize, like, we can talk how to help clients see that. But I think the first thing we have to do is help us realize, like, we're walking around making those mistakes, right? And I think the central challenge is overconfidence, right? Overconfidence is a problem of experts. Overconfidence is what you get when experts behave exactly like you'd expect experts to behave. And so realizing that people don't come to a financial planner because they're dumb. Most of our clients are super successful, smart people. Mm-hmm. They didn't come to us because they're dumb. They came to us because they can't see their own blind spots, and we can't see our own blind spots. And so asking yourself simple questions like, is that true? Right? The statement I just made about how I behave with my money, is that true? Tracking, and money's great because it leaves a breadcrumb trail.
Yeah.
Most of us don't want to see it. When I have this little program that we run every once in a while called 30 days in 3 seconds. It's where you take 30 days and every time you spend money, you just take 3 seconds and there's no goal. There's no shame. There's no blame. You just take 3 seconds and you say, isn't that, I just spent $7.87 at Jimmy John's. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. That's it. No shame. And the hard part is not having any shame or blame around it. It's just all we want to do is say, isn't that interesting? And every person I've ever taken through it, and every person I've ever convinced to track their spending for 30 days, every single person has come back and said, oh my word, I cannot believe this. Right? One of my buddies, I remember, came back and said, it was horrific. He's like, how much money we spent on this? It was food for him. It was horrific. And I'm like, so we just don't want to know.
Yeah.
You want to know something interesting? Plug Rescue Time in on your computer. Like the guys at Rescue Time reached out to me, so I had them do an experiment where we installed Rescue Time, and then I made some claims about how I spend my time. I wrote them down. I don't spend any time on email after 5 because I'm home with my kids. Mm-hmm. I never look at social media on the weekends. I would never spend time. I hate politics, and I would certainly never spend time on that news station, whichever one that one is, right? The website for you. I don't know if it's CNN for you or Fox News for you. Like, you get to pick. I would never spend any time there. And sports, I love sports, but I could care less about ESPN. Like, those were some of the claims I made. And then I just tried to behave like I normally would for 30 days. And they sent me back the results. And it was absolutely horrific, right? Like, he's like, Carl, you don't go more than 17 minutes without checking Twitter, right? You went to that political news station that you don't like, X times.
Yeah.
You spent, it was something crazy, like 57 minutes a day on ESPN or something where I was like, and if I show my kids that, my kids will be like, oh, that's cool, Dad. How come you didn't have time for this?
Mm-hmm.
Like, where were you at the baseball game? Well, that none of us want to go there, right? So that's why I think what we do is you just watch your behavior, we track it, and you be honest about it. We set up the conditions to have that kind of a painful discussion between, again, if you're just listening, I'm drawing with my hands now, like imagine a Venn diagram with no overlap. So it's just two circles. And one could say values or what's important, what I say is important to me. And the other one would say behavior.
Yeah.
And when there's no overlap, we have we have a strong disincentive to avoid that gap. And there's nobody who dares go into that gap with us. I mean, what do you think? Your spouse is going to do it? Try that sometime, see how it goes. Right. But back to we financial planners have implicit permission to enter that gap. Right. And we need to learn. Sometimes it's a punch in the nose for the client. Sometimes it's an empathetic hug. And that's the dance of what we do is like, wait, I thought you told me this, and now we're doing this. Did the value change? Or did we just kind of forget and I could give you example after example, but I think that's how we hold up the mirror, as Jason Zweig said.
So here's my Barbara Walters moment for you. What's something that you've learned about your own behavior through this 3 seconds of awareness exercise?
Yeah, like that it's funny, we hired a new financial planner about 6 months ago, and she's like, I think she's legitimately the best financial planner in the world, or we wouldn't have hired her. And she said to me after working with us for like a month or two, she said, this is her, my financial planner, her name's Christy. Christy says to me and my wife on a Zoom meeting, Carl, the fact that you thought you were the best person for this job is hilarious. So that's something I learned, that I am really good with other people's money.
Yeah. I'm
terrible with my own.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I learned. Like more specifically on the 30 days, I learned that I don't like, and look, here's what's interesting. 30 days, 3 seconds. The goal is not behavior change.
Mm-hmm.
You let go of all that. The goal is awareness. Now you and I, and nobody else has to listen to this since it's just you and I chatting. We know that if you bring awareness to a behavior, if you bring awareness to a situation, behavior change comes as a byproduct.
Sure.
That's my hypothesis, at least. I believe you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe that to be true. So 30 days is just about awareness. And I became aware that I don't love going to the movies with friends. I would much rather have them come over to the house and we'll make dinner together. Mm-hmm. And so that was just something I learned, like, oh, that's interesting. I just spent whatever, $30 on movie and a dinner or whatever the amount was. That's interesting. That's all I did. And then we did that again. And I was like, that's interesting. And then I found myself saying to my wife, hey, what if we just invited that couple over to our house? We'll have the ingredients there. We'll make food together. We'll hang out. We'll eat dinner. It will take 2.5 hours. And we did that instead.
So one of the things that I've learned about myself is I think I've fallen prey to this over precision at various times in my life. And I think I've done something that a lot of folks do is I set a number. When I get this number, that's when I'm really going to feel financially free. That's when I'm going to free up and do what I want to do. This is when I'm going to feel secure. I've now hit 2 of those numbers, right? And every time I get there, nothing changes, right? Like nothing changes. I feel none of the satisfaction that I thought I would feel. I mean, it's like the same, I liken it to the day I got my PhD, right? I spent all this time, it's this thing I wanted, I worked so hard for, and then you get your PhD and you're like the same idiot you were yesterday, right? It's just, you have this thing, you've crossed this finish line, but it's just not as satisfying as I thought it would be. You talk a lot about having enough, right? And you tweeted out a great GIF recently of this, this idea of enough. We're terrible as a human race about moving the goalposts. How can we ever hope to have enough? What can we do to cultivate a spirit of having enough?
Yeah. Well, first of all, why don't you tell us what the name is for that thing of hitting two numbers and keep moving the goalposts?
So it's hedonic treadmill is the name.
Yeah, it's so classic, right? Like, come on, you know the name, you've studied it, you've actually read the source material, like, of course. And then here we are, right, falling into the same traps because it turns out we're humans.
Yeah.
And so I think enough has nothing to do with money. I think you said something interesting, which is like, if I have this, I'll be secure. And I think that's a connection we all make, and I make it continually. So first of all, we should all, like, giant empathetic hug. Like, we all do. Like, isn't that amazing that Dr. Crosby does the exact same thing that the rest of us do, despite knowing better? I thought that was one of the most honest and disheartening parts of Kahneman's book was, I don't have any expectations that this will change behavior. It's just when somebody does something stupid, they'll know what to call it, right? Like, I thought that was great. But I think on the enough subject, and security particularly, if we're insecure, specifically if we're insecure and we're relating it to money, more money will not solve that problem. Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is getting away from the discussion about money. Enough comes from a sense of self-awareness, self-esteem, and our security comes. And I happen to believe that our security comes from a source other than those things that we're chasing, because we can never get enough of that. It just won't happen. I think our security comes, you can call it whatever you want. I happen to call it God. But a sense of, like, what's our real value and what's our place in the world, and where do we find connection? And it turns out all the things we think about when we think about happiness and connection, if they have to do with money, almost all of them are wrong. What was is it Elizabeth Dunn's book?
Yeah.
Yeah, like almost all of them are wrong. And that doesn't mean that money can't buy happiness. She, I think, famously said, if you think money can't buy happiness, you just don't know how to spend it. Yeah. But that's because we've misinterpreted the way we should spend it. It's more about connection with people we love. It's about serving others. It's about, somebody kind of smart said once, like, you really want to find yourself, lose yourself. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think we shift. We get ourselves off of that terrain and we go to another map. And that other map is about, well, what do the ancient wisdom traditions say about enough? That, to me, is the only solution. So again, it comes back to awareness. Gosh, every time I spend more money on unnecessary plastic items, thinking if I just have one more, it doesn't seem to work. Isn't that interesting? And we let that sort of work in us until what that will do is it'll work in us, drive us to a different path, and we'll try that path. I think of it as placing small bets. I think this will help. Oh, that didn't help. Oh, interesting. I think this might help. Oh, that didn't help. Interesting. Right? Making little guesses, placing small bets, being precise in our goals, and then looking for disconfirming evidence that says, hey, turns out you didn't want that. Okay. Right? That's how I think about it.
Yeah. Money has a purpose in life, right? Money's purpose is to reduce suffering and be sort of the vehicle for helping us do the things that really matter. But I think when people make it an end unto itself, and I'm at least as guilty as the next person of having done this, it's the drink that never quite quenches your thirst, right? It's just never, ever going to be enough. And so people need to find sources, whatever that is for them. Money is never, ever going to make you enough. I think what you said was beautifully put. So, Carl, one of the things that I love about you, there's a lot of talk of bubbles these days, and nowhere is that more prevalent than in the crypto and NFT space. You recently tweeted, I'm going to butcher it. I couldn't find the source material, but I remember seeing it. You recently said that advisors need to learn about crypto, at least become conversant in crypto, or sort of risk obsolescence. You can put your own more factual spin on that. And now you're planning on releasing a series of NFTs. So many behavioral finance experts are out there sort of poo-pooing crypto and NFTs. You're jumping in head first. Tell me about that decision.
Yeah. So first, let's just get really clear. What I said, and I can't remember the exact words either, but it was more we see this all the time, and it drives me crazy, is we think, and I remember clients saying this to me, like, you're always just dismissing. And so they would call me with a concern. And we know the end answer is probably going to be stay with the diversified portfolio that we've built on your values and goals using passive low-cost investments. We know that's going to be the answer. But clients don't know, like they need a chance to know that you've considered, that you're educated, that you know, that you can say, you know what? I dove into that. I understand it. And those things, like some of those are just noise that we can literally just be dismissive about. And we probably need to be dismissive a little bit more empathetically.
Yeah.
But then there's others that rise to the level. And I think cryptocurrency, particularly sort of blockchain technology, and we're confusing those two.
Sure.
We're confusing Doge or whatever that joke coin is with the underlying like blockchain technology. Some of the smartest people I know are like, this is going to be a big deal. And we're confusing the two. So we're being dismissive of something that you go listen to, Mark Andreessen, Tim Ferriss, like these guys are talking to super smart people about how this could be world changing, the blockchain technology that sits underneath this stuff. And we're up here saying, it's a joke, it's a joke, it's a joke. There's a disconnect there that I think we simply, and I, by the way, am not suggesting, I've got to be clear, I'm not suggesting there's any reason or way to invest in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm suggesting that we need to be at least empathetic and not dismissive. And I think at the next level, I think it would serve us well to be educated. Like I did a deep dive and was like, oh my gosh, there's some pretty cool, and living outside of the country helped, I think, with this perspective. There's a sense in the United States that we truly are the single exceptional thing in the whole world, and that our currency has always been the currency. And why would we ever think? It's really fascinating to me how much people talk in every other country I've been in about currency. Like normal people know, like in South Africa, you're gonna know, right, about currency. In New Zealand, normal people talk about currency. Here, I've never had a conversation with about it, right? Like ever, because we just sort of feel like, oh, we just do what we want and let everybody else. So my point is, this is this interesting mix of, I think we just need to understand it. Like we just need it. Banking in New Zealand was 5,000 times easier than banking in the United States. Sending money to a friend was like the easiest thing in the world, right? Like, and here. So anyway, I just think we need to just understand it. So you can look somebody in the eyes and say, and it's up to you to decide which of these little, things, which of these little noise bubbles are worth really understanding and which aren't. I happen to think at least the blockchain smart contract concept is worth understanding at some level. I'm not saying it's worth investing. In fact, it might be the opposite. Like probably is not. So, and then NFTs, listen, I've been a digital artist for a very long time. It's really hard to sell digital art. NFTs are fascinating to me. I've got a good friend, Jack Butcher, who has been exploring and doing amazing things with NFTs. So I'm not thinking of it as an investment. I'm thinking of it as a smart contract to allow me to sell digital art. So we're going to do, I guess there's a word for this, Daniel, phygital. I didn't know this. I don't love the word, but phygital. So it's physical and digital. So I'm going to do a canvas. I've got one right here, a canvas of one of the images. Yep. And then we're creating really cool animations of the images. And keep in mind, these sketches are purpose art, right? The job of these sketches is to create conversation. Mm-hmm. I just think of them as conversation grenades, right? You sort of toss them in a room and conversation breaks out. And they're the kind of conversations you want to be having with your clients. Like, what is enough? Well, if you have that hanging on your wall, which thousands of advisors do all over the world now, they find themselves having conversations. Instead of seeing the financial pornography network on in your lobby, which generates one kind of conversation, you have a canvas up of enough or fear and greed, which generates a different kind. And then now we have an animation that you can have playing on your screen in the lobby. And those two will be linked with an NFT we're going to do. And I just want to learn about it. So that's why we're playing around in the space.
So I've been reading some of Adam Grant's work, and he talks about our tendency to decamp into either wanting to be a prosecutor or a proselytizer. And
Right.
I think that one of the things, my big mistake, I think with crypto was immediately jumping into the role of prosecutor, right? Not before I had even vetted it, before I had explored it, I would have friends and come to me and say, hey, what is this Bitcoin thing? And from my lofty perch as a well-educated financial professional, it was my job to shoot this down and tell them how stupid it was, having not candidly vetted it very thoroughly myself. Just my initial reaction was, this is magical internet money. It's stupid. Like, leave it alone.
Mine
And,
too.
Patrick O'Shaughnessy's podcast, he did a multi-part series on Bitcoin and blockchain years ago that really, really, even before the price took off, because price certainly changes minds, right? But even before the price took off, I learned a ton from that podcast. And it's just made me more centrist, more middle of the road. There's tons of nonsense in that space. There's tons of really promising application. And for me, the big lesson learned from crypto is to try and be intellectually curious and temperate and moderate in when you encounter something new, and not become a fanboy or fangirl or become a hater sort of out of principle. That's my big takeaway from Bitcoin and blockchain personally.
I totally, and all you have to do is look back. I remember saying the same thing about Amazon.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Like, and oh, pets.com, right? Like, and then realizing like, well, so I'm actually not saying this from an investment perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'm simply saying this from an intellectual curiosity and an advice perspective. And it's also okay. What I would love to see more of is like, do you know it's okay for adults to say, I don't know, when you don't know, right? Like if you haven't read, like you can't, anyway, and the words we're using, I've been watching this on Twitter, the words advisors use, like that tweet generated a whole bunch of discussion. The words we're using prove the point. You don't know what you're talking about. Like when you say blockchain technology is ridiculous, look at Dogecoin, you have proven you have no clue what you're talking about, right? So I think I love that idea of just like, well, either let's say I don't know. And my sense is that these things come up all the time. And every time I go, like just have this conversation with the client, every time I go down these rabbit holes, they end up a waste of time. And I think right now we are clearly better just to stick with exactly what we're doing. Like that's a different discussion. Or, hey, we've spent a little bit of time understanding this, and we believe there's going to be some amazing things coming out of it. It's just too early for any of us to know what they're going to be.
Yeah.
Right. And we wouldn't want to bet your money on that kind of speculation.
Yeah.
Right. So like that's a different discussion than stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I don't know was probably the truest answer, whatever, 6 or 7 years ago when I first started to get, I just don't know a lot was probably my most honest answer. And I regret that I didn't lead with that.
Can we just talk about that real quick? I am telling you, I'm just thinking about an experience I just had with my daughter, my 16-year-old daughter. The I don't know is life-changing, right? To say to a loved one, a spouse, a kid, a client, a friend, I'm not sure about that. You're probably right. I heard James Clear say that maybe a year ago. You're probably right. He said something like, you're probably right has saved me so much time in relationships or something. And I started trying it lately, and I've just gotten to the point where I feel like I'm getting good. And this weekend even, I was just like, there was 10 different interactions with my family where I was able to say, gosh, I don't know. You're probably right. And it was about driving. It was about gun violence. So it was about something stupid like how to get to the store. And it was about something incredibly important like gun violence. It was the full range of things where I was just able to say, and nobody looked at me like I was dumb or less. In fact, the opposite. Right. And I think that's true with clients too, where you can just say, I don't know. Is it really important to you? Because if it's important to you, part of my job is I'll dig into it for you. And I'll come back when I'm educated. If it's just a passing interest, I don't know. Right.
So I was when I was doing therapy, I would say I was was a competent to good therapist and the world's worst marriage therapist. So my batting average is approaching zero with marriage therapy. But one of the conversations that we would often have when I was doing marriage therapy was, do you want to be right or do you want to be married? Because so much bad came from marriages where one or both parties were just so insistent on always having to be right. A lot of times when they had no leg to stand on. So, the way that you talk about this, the way that you even choke up when you talk about the power of just saying, I don't know. It's clear how powerful it can be. And I hope the listeners will take that. So Carl, I know we're about out of time. You have been on a world tour over the last couple of years. You lived in England, you lived in New Zealand. Now you're back in the US. We're going to do a lightning round question now. I'm going to ask you some superlatives and you tell me which country wins. Okay.
Yep.
Best food.
Sorry, it's not like New Zealand for the lamb and like the close to like fresh, right, local kind of produce. Challenging to find, right? Because New Zealand's typical cuisine of, whatever is not awesome. London has gotten insanely good, and London has a reputation of being really, really bad food. And it's gotten, in maybe since the time you've spent time there, like it's really, really good in London. So best food. Sorry, for me, good fresh meat wins. So New Zealand.
Okay. Best weather.
Well, definitely not London. Probably Nelson, because we were in a very specific little microclimate in New Zealand. Probably Nelson, New Zealand.
Okay. Best behaved investors.
Nowhere. Like I think we're all. It turns out we're all human, and that's actually interesting. I spent a bunch of time in South Africa, Australia. And I realized there was a time when I first said, like, turns out this isn't an American problem. It's not a South African problem. It's not a New Zealand problem. It's a human problem.
Yeah.
And so I haven't seen, I wish I could say that I'd seen a place where people tend to ignore it more. And that might be true maybe in New Zealand, because it's just not like so. Like in America, it feels like it's the water we swim in, like money and investing. In New Zealand, it was like, whatever, that's that thing that we do over here. So maybe, but that's just purely out of learning to ignore it.
Yeah. And last one, best natural beauty and outdoor activities.
That's a no-brainer, New Zealand.
Got it. So last question for you, Carl. You've got an exciting new project coming. If people want to learn more about you, tell us about your project. Tell us where they can follow you and read your writing and get your NFTs and all the good stuff.
Yeah. So for sure, the best place for this audience is to go to the societyofadvice.com. After years of talking about the secret society, we've decided to make it not so secret. So go to the Society of Advice, you'll run into that logo that Daniel's talking about, the dragon that floats around. And you'll hit a thing. We built this program because for years people have been like, well, you're always telling us what not to believe or what not. Could you give us something to believe? So I sat down challenged by a few people and wrote what I considered sort of like and again, I realized like this is just my opinion and I'm often wrong, but it was like my manifesto. And it ended up being 21 declarations of a real financial planner. And I was working on a book on it and I was recording a bunch of videos for the book. And we were like, you know what? Forget the book. Let's just put together a whole package of the videos. We worked really hard, cleaned them up, got them really short, like condensed. It's 21 declarations. It's called the Fellowship. That's what we call it, the Fellowship. And I've found the more I talk about it, the less it seems to help people. So let me just tell you this. If you want to learn more about the Fellowship, it's an online sort of experience. It's an anti-course. It's not, this is the problem. I don't even know what to call it. It's a manifesto that you can participate in. Just go to the societyofadvice.com. It will say something like to join the wait list, go here, because we only release it 6 times a year. But there's a secret. There's always secrets. The secret is in the confirmation email that you'll get after you join the wait list. It will say something like, wait lists are a bummer. Sorry about that. We only do it 6 times a year. But if you were sent here by someone, click here. If you click there, it will bring up a page that says, who sent you? Just put my name in. for this audience, just put my name in, and you'll get immediate access to more information about the fellowship. It doesn't mean you have to join. It just means you'll get immediate access to more rather than waiting for it. So that's what we're doing. The NFT stuff, I don't know where we're going to release that. I guess watch on Twitter.
Yeah. At Behavior Gap on Twitter. Go learn about the society from the Martin Luther of behavioral finance. Carl, always awesome talking to you. Thank you for all the wisdom you shared with us today. Thanks again.
Dan, it's such a pleasure. So much fun. And let me just tell you real quickly, thanks for the work that you do, like the difference that you make in the industry. And we know that you don't need to be doing the podcast. A lot of the things you're doing, we know that you don't need to be doing, but it makes a massive difference on all of us. So thank you.
No, coming from you, that means a ton. So thank you so much.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to Standard Deviations. If you can't wait till next week for more behavioral finance insights, visit www.orion.com. All opinions expressed by Dr. Daniel Crosby and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of or endorsement by Orion and its affiliates, subsidiaries, and employees. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for legal, tax, and investment decisions. The opinions are based upon information the participants consider reliable.